Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent broadcast for you today. If you could, please do hit the like and subscribe button. We have a couple of guests who are very knowledgeable about what's going on right now on the front lines. So we're going to have a detailed report about a certain section of the front line this week. So if you could, please spread the word, hit like and subscribe, and let people know. Also, we're on Twitter and Blue Sky. You can check us out there. We do some updates and things. And of course, we have our website, tochnyi.info. We have a lot of great articles there. We have interactive maps, and a lot of our projects are hosted there. So do feel free to check out tochnyi.info. It's a great website where a lot of researchers put very amazing work. Chat, you guys know, as always, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to address them all during the Q&A towards the end of the broadcast. So without any further delay, I will now present the news for this week. These are the main headlines as of February 22nd, 2026. First up, we have operations. Late on February 20th, the Votkinsk machine building plant in Russia's Udmurt Republic, a major center for missile manufacturing, was reportedly struck during a combined drone and missile assault. The facility is a state-owned defense complex and one of the country's most significant sites for producing advanced weaponry, including short-range Iskander-M ballistic missiles and intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear payloads across continents. It is also believed to be involved in the manufacturing of the newer Oreshnik intercontinental system. An independent Russian telegram outlet reported that at least 11 people were hurt in the incident. The strike was said to involve long-range Flamingo cruise missiles. Residents of the city described hearing blasts during the nighttime drone operation and said the missile factory appeared to be the intended target. Images and videos shared online showed thick dark smoke rising from the area, along with damage to nearby buildings, including shattered windows. Previous reporting has highlighted the plant's rapid growth during the full-scale invasion, including the addition of new structures, recruitment of thousands of employees, and the acquisition of sophisticated equipment despite international sanctions. Supplies were reportedly originating from China, Taiwan, and Belarus and routed through intermediaries, which enabled the expansion. Increased output from the facility has corresponded with a surge in missile attacks on Ukrainian cities. In 2024, the production of Iskander-M missiles nearly tripled compared to the previous year. On Thursday night, unmanned aircraft operated by the Security Service of Ukraine's Alpha Special Operations Center hit the Velika Lukskaya oil storage facility in Russia's Pskov region. The facility is located roughly 500 kilometers from Ukraine's border and is owned by Pskov Nefteprodukt LLC and stores diesel, gasoline, and other refined fuels. Local Telegram channels reported at least 4 blasts at the site, followed by a major fire. Workers at nearby businesses were said to have left the area in large numbers as the fire spread. Protective anti-drone netting had been installed over the fuel tanks, but the attacking drones were still able to reach their targets. Drones from Ukraine's Alpha Special Operations Center also struck the Taman Naftogaz oil terminal in Russia's Krasnodar Krai, the largest facility of its kind in the Black Sea region. The terminal is a major hub for transferring oil, gas, and ammonia shipments, and its storage infrastructure for petroleum products and liquefied gas is reported to exceed 1 million cubic meters. Residents in the area say they heard multiple explosions overnight and reported on social media that a fire broke out at the transshipment complex following the drone strike. Ukraine's defense forces carried out a strike on the Ilsky oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar Krai, according to a statement posted on Facebook by the General Staff. The statement said the operation was part of the ongoing campaign to weaken Russia's capacity to sustain offensive actions. The refinery is situated near the settlement of Ilsky and was hit on the night of February 17th. Ukrainian officials report the strike reached its intended objective and that a fire broke out on the facility's grounds afterward. Authorities say the full extent of the damage is still being assessed. The Ilsky refinery is one of the largest oil processing enterprises in southern Russia, with a primary capacity of around 6.6 million tons of crude oil per year. The facility is also identified as an important supplier of fuel to Russian military forces. Up next, we have economy and aid. The Swedish government has unveiled the 21st military assistance package for Ukraine, valued at nearly 12.9 billion kroner, or 1.42 billion US dollars, making it one of the largest such contributions Sweden has provided. According to official information, the aid is intended to address Ukraine's most pressing requirements: requests for air defense equipment, long-range strike capabilities, and ammunition. Beyond weapons and hardware, the package also allocates funding for innovation programs designed to develop new solutions to challenges faced by Ukrainian forces. It also finances Sweden's involvement in both bilateral and multinational training efforts and covers the costs associated with delivering equipment that had previously been pledged. A significant portion of the funding, about 4.3 billion kroner, will be used to acquire newly produced air defense systems. These are designed as modular units combining guns and missiles with interceptors, electronic warfare tools, sensor arrays, and command and control elements, enabling protection of large territories against aerial threats. Another 3 billion kroner is earmarked for ammunition, training, and logistical support. This includes long-range artillery rounds, multiple types of 40mm air defense munitions, and ammunition for 12cm grenade launchers. Sweden's armed forces will transfer recoilless rifles along with supporting equipment and various kinds of ammunition. Funds are also set aside to replace the donated systems within Sweden's own inventory and to transport the material to Ukraine. Roughly 5.6 billion kroner will go towards long-range capabilities, technological innovation, and financial contributions intended to strengthen Ukraine's effectiveness on the battlefield. This portion includes expanded cooperation on long-distance drone development and financing for 2 initiatives to supply unmanned surface vessels. The government also plans to dedicate more than 1 billion kroner to broader Ukraine-related efforts, including a $100 million contribution to the Pearl Initiative, about 50 million kroner for an electronic warfare capability coalition, and approximately 20 million kroner for a maritime capability coalition. Additional support will come from the Swedish Defense Research Agency, which will continue work to improve Ukraine's ability to detect nuclear weapons and to refine surveillance system algorithms. The package includes assistance for civilian defense, particularly measures aimed at strengthening Ukraine's resilience against hostile information campaigns originating from Russia. Ukraine has obtained a $690 million grant financed by Japan and Canada through the G7 Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Mechanism. The funds will be delivered through the World Bank's Peace in Ukraine program, according to the country's finance ministry. The money has been deposited into the general state budget of Ukraine and is intended to cover essential government spending, including pensions for older citizens, social welfare payments, and subsidies for housing and utilities. The financing consists primarily of international partner contributions, $544 million from Japan, $146 billion from Canada, and about $800,000 from the Peace in Ukraine Multi-Donor Trust Fund. Officials say the payment represents Japan's first installment under the ERA initiative and Canada's final one within the same framework. The program is designed to provide Ukraine with $50 billion in support. Work on the ERA mechanism began toward the end of 2024. Canada's total commitment under the program is 5 billion Canadian dollars, roughly 3.6 billion US dollars, with earlier installments of 2.5 billion and 2.3 billion Canadian dollars already delivered in the spring and summer of 2025. Japan's overall contribution to the G7 financial support network is expected to reach around 3 billion US dollars. Ukraine's finance leadership expressed appreciation to the World Bank and both governments for the assistance, noting that the funding helps preserve financial stability and ensures the continuation of critical public spending. Earlier this month, Ukraine's finance ministry and the World Bank signed an agreement formalizing the grant under the Public Expenditures for Administrative Capacity Endurance in Ukraine project. The program, launched in June of 2022, is intended to keep core state functions operating despite the ongoing war. Altogether, it has mobilized approximately $51.7 billion in funding to date. U.S. President Donald Trump has extended the U.S. sanctions imposed on Russia for another year for its actions against Ukraine, according to a notice published in the Federal Register on February 19th. The decision maintains the national emergency first declared in 2014 and keeps all existing restrictions in place until at least March 6, 2027. The move comes after the most recent U.S.-supported negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow, which the White House described as showing meaningful progress, ultimately produced no concrete outcomes as Russia continued to insist on sweeping conditions viewed as requiring Ukraine to yield to its demands. Since returning to office, Trump has now renewed the sanctions twice, having previously extended them on February 25, 2025. The renewal continues Executive Order 13660, signed on March 6, 2014, which declared a national emergency in response to actions seen as undermining Ukraine's democratic institutions. The renewal states that Russia's conduct still represents an exceptional and ongoing danger to U.S. national security and foreign policy interests. The sanctions framework currently in force now reflects actions taken by 3 successive U.S. presidents. Up next, we have foreign relations. Hungary's prime minister has warned that his government will block a proposed €90 billion European Union loan package for Ukraine unless oil shipments from Russia resume through the Druzhba pipeline that crosses Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian officials say the pipeline stopped operating after sustaining damage during a Russian strike in January, a disruption that drew sharp criticism from both Hungary and Slovakia, whose economies rely on the route. Writing on social media, the Hungarian leader said that his country would continue to oppose the financial package for Ukraine as long as the pipeline remains closed, insisting that Hungary would not accept pressure on the issue. Slovakia has also voiced concern over the halted deliveries. The country's economy minister stated that Ukraine had delayed restarting the flow of oil until February 24th. Earlier in the week, the Slovak prime minister declared an emergency related to energy supplies and warned that his government could take countermeasures if the pipeline was not put back into service. Hungary's foreign minister confirmed that Budapest is actively opposing the EU loan proposal. He argued that by stopping oil transit through the Druzhba system, Ukraine was failing to uphold its obligation under its association agreement with the European Union. And last item this week, Poland's president signed a law on February 19th that folds support measures for Ukrainian refugees into the country's general legislation governing the protection of foreigners. This ends the separate framework created after Russia's full-scale invasion. This earlier law made it easier for Ukrainians fleeing the war to obtain residence permits, work legally, receive social assistance, and enroll in schools. Under the new arrangement, those benefits will be integrated step by step into the broader system that applies to all foreign nationals, establishing a single temporary protection regime rather than a Ukraine-specific one. The president said he approved of the legislation, believing it would safeguard public finances, simplify administrative procedures, and address concerns about fairness. The law prolongs the legal stay of all Ukrainian citizens in Poland until March 4, 2027, while maintaining residency rights for individuals who already hold protection status or whose documents were extended because of the war. One notable change requires newcomers to obtain a PESEL personal identification number within 30 days of arrival. Failure to do so will result in the loss of temporary protection. Meanwhile, in Slovakia, authorities have taken a different approach by automatically extending temporary protection for people displaced from Ukraine until March 4, 2027. According to the Interior Ministry, the move follows a decision by the Council of the European Union and was formalized domestically by a government decree issued on February 21st. Officials said individuals can verify the validity of their protection status through an online portal. Those who did not apply for a residence card during their initial registration may submit an application later by booking a new appointment through the reservation system. Temporary protection in Slovakia grants the right to live in the country and provides access to healthcare, education, and employment opportunities. And that's it for the main headlines this week.
Yeah, I believe that means we now move to the next segment, and that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. And since I wasn't there last week, I will also do the news from the week before. We are starting from news from last week, Tuesday, in the German city of Bedburg, which, in cooperation with the German-Ukrainian Association Blau-Gelbes Kreuz e.V., has donated an excavator to its Ukrainian twin city, Mykolaiv. The excavator is now being used by one of the municipal, I have very much trouble with this word every time I use it, companies. One day later, Minister of Energy of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, announced that Germany and Ukraine are currently working on an additional about €4.8 million investment in the Ukraine Energy Support Fund to help finance spare parts and energy equipment needed for repairs of Ukraine's energy grid. With over €557 million invested and pledged, Germany is already by far the biggest investor in this fund and is currently responsible for nearly 31% of all investments done and announced by 24 countries, the EU, and private individuals. On Thursday last week, Germany's Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius announced that Germany will fund extended-range artillery ammunition for Ukraine. Back in January, I already reported that Ukraine has formally asked Germany to fund this kind of artillery ammunition to enable the effective employment of artillery in drone-dominated kill zones. On the same day, Pistorius also announced that Germany would deliver 5 PAC-3 missiles to Ukraine if other countries join together and deliver a further 30 missiles for the Ukrainian Patriot air defense systems. A day later, a spokesperson for the German MOD told me that for reasons of military and operational security, they are unable to say whether Germany would also supply these missiles to Ukraine if the partner nations are unable to mobilize the remaining 30 as requested. And as of 2 days ago, there's still no definitive commitment from European countries per statement from Pistorius. Germany also still needs to get US approval for the possible delivery. However, Pistorius said that he is optimistic and that the 30 requested missiles will be gathered soon. On Friday last week, a very high-level Ukrainian delegation, including the Ukrainian President Zelensky and the German Minister of Defense Pistorius, visits the German-Ukrainian joint venture Quantum Frontline Industries, where the newest version of the Ukrainian-designed Linzer UAVs are being manufactured in Germany. The first Linzer UAV was formally handed over, and up to 9,999 additional ones will be delivered to Ukraine this year, financed by the German government. And last but not least, on Tuesday this week, in a cabinet meeting, the state government of Schleswig-Holstein approved an additional €1 million investment in aid for the Kherson Oblast. The funds will be invested in providing the necessary equipment for generating and securing energy and heat. And that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Germany to Ukraine. It was a good update. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Okay, so up next, we're going to talk a little bit about the Russian economy with Stanimir. We got quite a few stories that we want to cover this week, so we'll get right to it. First, Stanimir, I think we want to talk about what's going on in the Baltic. Is that right? So I'll just let you go off on that because we've been talking about that. I will mention that we've got some short videos that should be coming out this week about the current situation there. But of course, I think it's always better to hear it from Stanimir. So Stanimir, what's going on in the Baltic?
Yeah, in the Baltic, for those who are following, they know that the Baltic is frozen. And when it comes to the ports of Ust-Luga and the big port of St. Petersburg, there you have ice between 30 and 50 centimeters. So traversing that port is done only with the help of an ice-class vessel or an icebreaker. I think right now they have 8 icebreakers, with 2 being urgently sent over. No, they had 6 icebreakers and asked for 2 big ones. The diesel-propelled Murmansk and the nuclear-powered Sibir. I think Sibir arrived 2 days ago. So what they're doing is using icebreakers and ice-class ships to move goods from the ports. Now, this is important because these ports handle most of Russia's fertilizer exports. So if they're closed, you can't export fertilizers and you start getting a buildup, and they basically have to stop production because they have no place to store the excess production. Also, they export a lot of Russia's oil, and also they import a lot of aluminum and export steel. So aluminum, they import it in a raw form, which is needed for the aluminum smelters. And what we've had is various industries actually complaining about the situation because, as I said, initially they started with 6 icebreakers, which meant that the time to reach the port was between 8 and 12 hours. That significantly makes operations difficult because then for the round trip, you need to spend 24 hours and you need to use an icebreaker to protect your ship. This was made additionally more difficult because in July of 2025, the FSB was given authority to let ships into port. And as part of that, they instituted a new requirement, which meant that for any ship that got into port, it had to be, they can ask for it to be videotaped, to have a videotaped inspection of the underwater hull. So that is now in effect. And what happens is you need to wait 10, 12 hours for the ship to come into port. Then the ship has to be inspected for another 12 hours usually. So on average, when the weather conditions were better, it took around 11 hours and 27 minutes on average to inspect the ship. And then you start loading it. And this has become a big problem for a lot of industries that have sent letters to the Russian government, especially the Russian Transportation Ministry. The Russian Transportation Ministry, of course, has denied that there are any issues. But like I said, the smelters for aluminum are almost running dry. Steel cannot be moved. The inspections have also added a cost that is estimated for the coal industry to be between $0.5 to $1.5 for the inspection per every ton of coal that's loaded on the ship. So that is going to come into several hundred millions of dollars in extra cost for the coal industry, which is already suffering. So basically, for a while, without the additional ice breakers, movement from and to the port had practically frozen because of the required time to check boats. You also couldn't check boats outside of the port where they usually park at one of the islands because the ice was so thick you couldn't get divers or drones to go under the ice to inspect the hull. And like I said, in practice, the combination of the ice, which happens rarely, but right now it's going to maybe be more often a thing that happens in the Baltic with the more unstable weather, and a combination of that with FSB requirements to inspect ships and keep them outside of the port until further notice from the FSB. It has become basically a stranglehold on the exports of one of Russia's largest export venues, that is the Baltic. I think it accounts for a third of all oil exports as well. So they're usually split between the Baltic, the Black Sea, and the Russian Far East. And this has become a major economic issue for Russia, hence the need to rush icebreakers from the Northern Sea route down into the Baltic to prevent further restriction of travel. And also one of the reasons for the FSB introducing these restrictions was the fear of diversions, the fear of attacks from Ukraine using underwater devices being stuck to ships going into Russian ports. So Ukraine has basically managed to stranglehold the Russian sea export with just a few attacks on ships outside and into port.
Yeah, I think it's, in summary, right, it's a combination of a really harsh winter and like really intransigent policies from the Russian government that are currently, I guess they're paranoid about Ukrainian attacks as well. And it's causing, like as you said, a stranglehold on Russian shipborne traffic. So yeah, I guess we'll keep tabs on that. So then the next story is, of course, the Chinese tire story. Stanimir, I know you wanted to discuss this a little bit. So yeah, let's talk tires.
Yeah, so we got the numbers for 2025 for Russian tire production, and for passenger car tires, which make up 80% of the tires that are produced domestically in Russia, the production decreased by 20%. For tires overall, the production is down 21%. That means that right now, around 45% of Russian domestic tire production capacity is underutilized. The reason for that is that although domestic production decreased by 21%, imports decreased by just 2%. Partially, the decrease for both is due to the decrease of car sales by 15.6% in 2025. The other reason is that the imports are now 70% dominated by Chinese brands, and mostly those are cheap tires. So what has happened is that China again has managed to cannibalize a portion of the Russian auto market and destroy the Russian producers who are offering the cheaper goods. So what's happening is that the more expensive segments of Russian tire production And I have to mention that Russian tire production is dependent on factories that were built by European nations and Western nations, which they sold afterwards and left the country. So for cheap tires, the devastation is significant when it comes to Russian brands, because China has offered over 200 brands, and that's growing for exports to Russia. Their exports are comparable. I mean, the entire imports of tires into Russia is comparable to the overall number of tires at 25.4 million to 28 million. And I have to say that Russia last year, in an attempt to protect this market, rushed to introduce at the end of the year a new requirement for an ecological tax on Chinese tires, mainly because that's who they're afraid of, because they found out that there were more carcinogenic components inside Chinese tires than in the Russian standard, than what the Russian standard allows. So immediately they set an additional environmental tax that would make Chinese tires more expensive slightly, but that was enough to hope that 5 to 10% of domestic production may resume in 2026. However, when it comes to the cheapest tire brands in Russia, and the cheapest tires on offer in Russia, I think those are completely devastated, and this will only stop further cannibalization of their market share and will not really reverse the trend of Chinese tires dominating the lower segments of tire production. So yeah, this is another story where China, which is the partner without limits of Russia, is basically strip mining the Russian market for money with the minimum investment they could do. Just marketing tires and not localizing any production like the European and Western countries used to do.
Yeah, I think it's like as you said, it's kind of a combination of the Chinese seeing a market opportunity and taking it, and then also the Russians' kind of inability. Their choices on the international stage have resulted in an inability or unwillingness, or whatever you want to call it, to integrate fully into the global supply chain and have access to European producers, and then that has resulted eventually in the Russians being unable to offer tires at a competitive price, so the Chinese can step in and kind of just take over the market. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely another story in the Russian industrial sphere that is experiencing severe turmoil. I guess we'll continue to follow it. So then the last story this week I wanted to talk to you about was just a quick little story in Reuters. Pretty straightforward story. Basically, just talking about how Russian cafes and restaurants are closing because of a major stall in consumption. This is something that, you've been covering for, I'd say, over a year now, Stanimir, probably longer than that. But I think that this article is short. It did a reasonably good job for like a lay audience that isn't as doesn't follow the statistics as closely. I think it does a good job of like communicating a certain set of systemic circumstances that have happened, and then the kind of end result on the small to medium business owners in Russia. And I guess the bottom line is basically, as you've been pointing out, like another niche of the Russian service economy, or many niches, are being kind of squeezed out. Either the entire niches or definitely the smaller to medium-sized producers or service providers are being squeezed out, and the only thing left are these big companies. So, I don't know. Did you see anything in the article you took issue with, or you basically agree with it and just kind of repeating what you've been saying, or what do you think about it?
Well, it says what we've been saying, but it says it, like you said, almost a year late. I want to focus on when we started having stories that indicated that the restaurant sector is going to head for a collapse. So from April 2025, Russia's Postbank had a survey, and they found out that there were 1/3 less customers in Russian restaurants, which led to restaurants to increase their average price by 70%, and that they were starting to cut portions because of the rising cost of ingredients. So either they cut portions or they increased the cost of ingredients as part of the dishes. So it went from 25% to 33% in the final dish. And by December 2025, we had stories that the number of restaurants were just closing down significantly by 3% in December. And that for sushi and pizza places, it was even worse. And in December also, we started seeing places like Moscow's Patriarch Pond, seeing 16 restaurants close down, which is one of the most prestigious places in Moscow to have a restaurant. And the vacancy rate in that area rose from 5 to 11%, just because the share of the restaurants that closed down was so significant. And again, by February of this year, we had a collapse in orders for catering establishments, whereas at the same time, it has to be said that restaurants and cafes and bars saw a decrease, whereas fast food establishments saw an increase of 7%. And this is all having to do with Russians optimizing, as they say, their costs, which means cutting spending because times are tough. Even though the statistics show that salaries are growing, it doesn't happen. I mean, it's not being represented when it comes to Russian spending over the last several months.
Yeah, I think it seems like another case of kind of a perfect storm for a sector of the Russian economy. You've got consumption going off a cliff, as you said. The consumers are nervous. If they have any extra money at all, they're probably saving it or thinking about more resilient things than eating out. And then you have the restaurant owners, mainly small medium businesses that are. The ingredient prices are going up really high. And on top of that, there's not really any cheap money available. They can't really get loans. So, the only real option for them is to close out. So I think it's like a sort of canary in the coal mine for the broader Russian service economy. It's not looking good, I guess. Anything else about that?
Yeah, I have to add that for the broader services economy, prices have also gone up by 10 to 20%, depending on what you're looking at. And we might start seeing that services are being cut by Russians because they just can't afford them.
Yeah, so that's all the stuff I had for you this week, Stanimir. So now we can go to your general report on the Russian economy. Over to you.
Yeah, I want to start with the utilities that I track every week. We have a picture of them for this week. I think Erlend can bring it up. Yep. This week we had almost as many utilities a bit more utilities outages than in last year at the same time, at the same week. I'm thinking that this is more because there was a spike in utilities outages at the end of the season last year, not so much that utilities are unnaturally falling down this year, utilities outages. So it's more because of that. There's also a caveat that one of the sources I use for Zabaykovsky Krai turned it to an AI slop from being an actual online journalism site. Now it's mostly generating pictures with AI and generating headlines with AI and stories, so they're covering a lot less of the outages in the region. For example, they didn't even cover the outage of electricity for the capital of Zabaykovsky Krai, Chita. So that's the reason. And when it comes to utilities, I want to also mention something that happened this week with one of the regions in Russia. This was in one of the towns in Volgograd region. Because the new heating bills are much higher than last year's, people are saying 150% higher than last year. If you have a heating bill in that town that is 25% higher, 25% higher than last year, you automatically get an installment plan to pay for your heating bill for that month. That's an automatic thing that happens to you. However, the installment plan, because likely they partnered with a bank that provides the money immediately, and then they transfer the costs of this loan to the person, the installment plan comes with an interest. And the interest rate, as far as I can tell, is 18.5%, which is the central bank rate plus 3%. So in practice, what they do for you is if your heating bill is higher than it was last year, and it is, they automatically take out a loan in your name and offer you that as an installment plan, which is not what it is. It's just a loan in your name. So this is another way that Russians are being screwed by their utility companies this year. And one of the reasons that utility bills are higher is because in previous years they would pay regular amounts for the entire year. Now that is shifted to just the heating months of the year, so from 12 months down to 5 months. And automatically that means that the bills will be double or higher. And also there was a up to 20% increase depending on the region of utility tariffs, and utility companies are allowed to also add additional recalculation because the heating this year had to be increased because the temperatures were much lower for longer. So that means that utility heating bills are much higher, and henceforth you get the loan. Also, another thing I don't think we've mentioned is that if you have water without a meter for it, you pay a fixed amount for the number of people in the house that use that water. That is for drinking water, not hot water. And this year they doubled or tripled the price of water without a meter. Again, that also means that if you're in a town where water was out because of an outage that the pipes were frozen for drinking water, you still have to pay the full amount. There is no recalculation. And the full amount is this time 2 to 3 times higher than it was in the previous year. Again, the Russian Federal Anti-Monopoly Service was sent to check utility prices, and they confirmed that they rose by just 1.7% in January. That's just because they follow the nominal tariff increases. They don't follow these exceptions and these details when it comes to utilities outages. And I think for Rostat, the increase is just 16.5% for electricity and a similar amount for the other utilities. So stats that should impact inflation are being massaged heavily, and you don't get the real numbers. But we'll speak more about that later. Now, when it comes to gasoline shortages as an aftermath from last year, we have 2 independent gas station chains that are facing bankruptcy procedures or having their accounts frozen. The first one is RK Raid, which operates 28 gas stations in Crimea under the brand of Start. It has, by the Moscow Commercial Bank, a bankruptcy procedure initiated against it. So this is the aftermath of the gasoline shortage. The gas station chains couldn't pay their bills, and they're now being forced into bankruptcy. And the second chain is Evertrans. It operates 57 gas stations. And this time it's interesting because it operates them in Moscow and Moscow regions. And its accounts have been frozen due to action by the Federal Tax Service. So again, they're practically going into bankruptcy because of how bad last season was because of the shortages of gasoline and the price hikes. Next, we have the oil taxes for February, which are out. We have also a picture of them. And you can see that they're a bit higher than January's taxes by 6.2%. But when compared to February of 2025, they're down by 62%. The slight increase for January, from January, is because in January, the average price of Ural was $40.95 per barrel. So almost $41 per barrel, which is higher than the price for Russian Ural oil in January, which was closer to $49 per barrel. The way Russian oil taxes work is that for the current month, they take the average price of the dollar and the average price of the barrel of oil. They calculate it using a coefficient, and there's partially the price is calculated for the barrel between the ESPO oil from the Russian Far East, 22%, and 78% from the Ural oil, and that's how you get how much the oil tax is for that month. Again, this is a high tax given that you have costs of transportation when you go to India of around $14 per barrel for the tanker. So there's not much left for the Russian oil companies there. We also had news from Izvestia, where they found out that the additional payments for teachers in small towns and small villages, which are 5,000 and 10,000 rubles respectively. In 10 regions, they were delayed because of a lack of money in January. And this is a growing trend with regions not having enough money in their accounts to pay such additional bonuses to teachers and sometimes even their entire salaries. The other interesting news that came from the regions is that Kemerovo region lowered the payment to relatives for the death of a soldier in the war. It used to be 3 million rubles. It was set in 2022. And on Friday morning, they lowered it to just 1 million rubles. It has to be said that Kemerovo is an outlier because it's the region with the largest budget deficit. And that's partly linked to previously having more federal subsidies because Putin's relatives were ruling it. And also previously having more revenue because the coal companies weren't reporting losses for the year, in their majority. The final big story is that the Moscow Stock Exchange, for trading purposes, began trading a proxy of the US dollar, which allows people to trade with a virtual representation of the dollar for, again, hedging purposes. But in the end, all the funds are in rubles because there's still a ban, still sanctions on the Moscow Stock Exchange. Now, when it comes to banking, we also have information about credit cards this week. So there was a record low issuance of credit cards in January 2026, the lowest since January 2021, back in the COVID era. Only 970,000 credit cards were issued with a combined limit of 100 billion rubles. This is the lowest combined limit since March of 2022. And the number of active credit cards that Russian owns decreased by 1.5% to 95.6 million credit cards. This is the lowest they have been since May 2024. However, at the same time, the debt on these credit cards grew from 4.7 to 4.8 trillion rubles. When it comes to gas and oil from commodities, we have news that the Chinese refineries have begun actively buying Russian oil that India is rejecting. So if in December 2025, 1.4 million barrels a day were being delivered to Chinese ports, in January it rose to 1.72 million, and in February to almost 2.1 million barrels per day. So a significant increase by almost half of what was being imported has been in effect since December. When it comes to the construction market, we had information that the cost of constructing warehouses and logistic facilities in Russia is expected to rise by 5 to 11%. This is double the growth that happened in 2025, but however is lower than the growth in 2024, which was 20%, and the growth of 2023, which was 18%. This is partially because there's still demand for warehouses and logistic facilities, but it's much less subdued than what happened during the expansion of the Russian online marketplaces and Russian retailers opening online stores which work directly from warehouses. And also we have the information that the commissioning of warehouses in 2025 hit a record with 8.7 million square meters. And this is 50% higher than in 2024, with 3.2 million of those being in Moscow regions, which is a record for said region. When it comes to interesting data points, I've collected a few for this week. The first one is the parallel imports by Russia decreased to almost half of what they were in 2025 January. For January 2026, they were just $1 billion worth. For 2025, on average, it was close to $2 billion per month. But the total for 2025 was $23.1 billion. And they're saying it's due to self-reliance and Russia producing more goods domestically, but I'm saying that they're just cutting imports because it's more expensive to do parallel imports of a lot of goods. They're reducing the number of goods that are being imported, and that's why the figure is decreasing. Russia has also been hit by the increase in the price of the price of coffee machines, the price of coffee. So what they did was coffee machines sold in Russia grew by 12% in 2025, and the amount in rubles grew by almost 4% to 38 billion rubles. And again, the reason is the rising price of coffee at coffee shops. Russians are just making coffee at home, which is cheaper. Russia is also warned that by Rusprotsoyuz that in 2026 there may be a shortage of honey. This is due to the bad weather in 2025, and prices of honey have increased by 40 to 50% depending on the type since September 2025. This is another shortage that's looming on the horizon. I don't think there's something in this case that the Russian Ministry of Agriculture could do, apart from maybe preparing earlier and having a plan in case of bad weather, and to subsidize farmers who are raising bees and making honey. But again, the Russian Ministry of Agriculture is, how should I put it, very stuck in their ways and responds to crises after they are full-blown, rather than predicting them and taking measures to avoid them. We also have information that the sales of stronger alcohol than 9% grew by 4.1% in January 2026. This is after a decrease for all of 2025, and the reason is due to the prolonged holidays in January, which at the start of them, the price still hadn't accounted for the increase in excise tax. So they were still selling alcohol at a cheaper level, and people rushed to stock up and bought more for the holidays because the price hasn't jumped, and they were warned about that. We also have data from the Kaliningrad car plant of Avtotor. It used to produce BMWs and Hyundai Kias. Its production in 2025 rose by 10% to 33,400 cars, but I have to say that this is still 84% lower than the pre-COVID production when the plant was operated by European and South Korean companies. And the final one is for the Russian car maker AvtoVAZ. It reduced its sales plans for February 2026 by 15% to just 20,000 cars, after the sales in January were 28.7% lower than in January 2025, down to just 9,700 cars. If it's selling so few cars this year every month, it would mean that they would have to cut production by another 30 to 40% because of a build-up of inventory, and they're overproducing cars. So they're probably headed for another 4-day work week period if this continues. I have to say, however, that because from March 1st, there's going to be a change that makes Russian taxis use domestically produced cars that are, I think, under 3 years old or under 6 years old. I'm not quite sure how the law was entered in the last changes, but they would probably see an increase in sales of cars in March and in February because of this. So maybe they have solved the issue with car sales for 2026 by forcing this law to pass by the Russian Duma. Finally, when it comes to inflation and debt, first we have the inflation for the period from the 10th to the 16th of February. It was still relatively high at 0.12%. And thus far, the inflation for February is 0.32%. However, the inflation for 2026 as a whole was reduced to just 1.95%. This was lowered. Basically, it means that the inflation for January was lowered by 0.41%. So close to 20% or 25% of all the inflation for January was removed. Inflation right now should be 2.36% rather than 1.95%. The reason they gave for this is because they're looking at different goods when they calculate the inflation for the month, then they're looking from the goods when they calculate the inflation for the week, and thus they managed to use and mix the two and pick the lower. However, I haven't seen any indication that inflation has actually slowed down for some goods compared to the rest. So basically, they're cheating when it comes to reporting actual inflation. And from here on out, I'll keep an adjustment of by how much they've cheated for the year. So far, it's 0.41%, which is a significant number if the central bank expects the inflation to be 4 to 5.5%. That's 10% of that. Then we have the auctions for this week. There was a big auction when it comes to the first one. It was for 255.2 billion rubles. And the yield, now that the interest rate has been lowered, dropped by more than 0.5% to 14.73%. And the second auction managed to sell 72.3 billion rubles, and the yield was again low at 14.75%. And I think that's it for me for this week.
Okay, thank you, Stanimir. As always, we'll tune in each week to check on the Russian economy. So now we're going to discuss a bit about what's been going on the front line. So yeah, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Erlend now. And Erlend, what do you got for us?
Yeah, we have Sirdo and Gesh from Unit Observer. They published a pretty comprehensive summary of what has been changing on the southern front, and a lot of information about troop rotations. So I'm gonna introduce Sirdo. He's associate at Tochnyi and a very good Orbat mapper, and obviously Gesh, the legendary, the guy that can find any Russian falling asleep through some weird methods on Russian social media. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Hello. Good evening.
Okay, so I think I'll give a kind of a brief overview of what's been happening, and then let Gesh give some information on the Russian units in this area. So, as I'm sure many of our viewers probably already know, because it's been quite widely discussed in the past 2 weeks, there have been some substantial Ukrainian counterattacks on the southeastern corner of the front line, specifically between the Zaporizhia and Dnipro oblasts. And this is kind of like a noteworthy area, because the Russian advances here in the second half of 2025 have been the deepest compared to the entire front. So it's a very kind of impressive shift of momentum from the Ukrainians to be able to achieve this. And of course, the Russian tactics of infiltration with 2 or 4 man groups, so basically light infantry just walking maybe 10, 15 kilometers, if not more, through the front line and just taking positions, lightly defended positions with little gear, has kind of turned against them, seemingly in this area. One of the major kind of towns where actions have been ongoing has been Ternuvate, which has seen substantial counterattacks by some of the assault regiments. And in general, it seems that the assault regiments have been doing most of the attacks on the western side of this sort of counterattack sector, if we can call it that. Mainly, it's been the 1st, 33rd, and 475th assault regiments, with the 1st and 33rd already being in this area since December, while the 475th is kind of like a noteworthy addition, as it rotated here from Kupiansk, where it was also attacking in November and December, and it was basically the main unit liberating the city. And there's been also other elements from the 24th, 210th assault regiments, and possibly the 48th assault battalion. So basically, these units have been the main sort of effort on the western sector, so north of Huliaipole, while the other very noticeable addition is the 82nd and 95th Air Assault Brigades, who have been basically moved here from Pokrovsk direction, in late January. And of course, they've moved from Pokrovsk to Pokrovske, which is kind of confusing, I guess. And they've been attacking the sort of basically north to south on the eastern flank of the 36th and Combined Arms Army and the 29th Combined Arms Army. And I think at this point I can kind of turn it over to Gesh to give some background and overview on what these Russian units have been doing, what their structure has been, and some more details.
Yes, hello. I will try to find the correct screen to share. I think I'll just wait, give me a second. I'll just share the whole screen. Should be fine. All right. Do you see it already? Okay, good. I want to talk a little bit about what preceded this offensive, namely some very interesting Russian unit movements. Before the Russians took Pole, there was a big shift of Russian units down to the south, and it continued like it started a few months ago already, and it intensified even after the taking of Pole. So around 2 months ago, like after they took the city, the main Russian forces in the north were the 5th Tank Brigade and the 36th Motorized Rifle Brigade. However, when they tried to push towards Dobropilya, the one in Zaporizhia, they transferred at least 1 battalion, if not more, of the 36th Motorized Rifle Brigade down south. And also, like all the other bigger Russian brigades in the area, like the 37th, and I mean the 64th isn't that big, but they were all transferred down to the south to reinforce the push north of Pole. What's also very interesting is, parallel to this, they shifted some forces of the 19th Tank Division up north to Konstantinivka. We don't know exactly yet which units they shifted, so it's not really represented on the map. But we have seen footage of the 19th Tank Division, and we also have multiple missing in action soldiers that have shown up near Konstantinivka. So we have evidence that they moved some forces up there. So that means that the force posture near Novopavlivka is also weakened. And now to give some focus to the units that actually defended the area where in my opinion, the main Ukrainian attack focus was. And we have 2 main units there, namely the 89th Rifle Regiment. I mean, it's actually the only rifle regiment that's operating in the East Group. I mean, in that part of the East Group. And it's, I mean, not only by name, but also by equipment, way weaker than a normal motorized rifle regiment. And the other regiment is the 186th Motorized Rifle Regiment. By on paper being a quite large regiment, it has 4 battalions with 4 companies each, so 16 companies. It's a very specific type of regiment. It's one of the newly created, they're at this point 1 or 2 years old, depending on the unit, a territorial control regiment. This is a unit with, I'd say, rather low cohesion, because the soldiers of this unit are put together by soldiers of other rear units. So they go in there, look at the rear units of for example, the 36th Combined Arms Army, look at the people they don't really need in the rear, and then send it to the 186th Motorized Rifle Regiment. So, and at this point, they have also transferred parts of the 36th Motorized Rifle Brigade back to Ternopilya. I think they still had some elements there, but as I said, they were split up between Ternopilya and Dobropilya. So the Russian force posture in this area was extremely weak for the front. So I think the Ukrainians also found a very good opening in terms of the opposition they faced. So yeah, I just wanted to give some overview over the Russian forces in the area, and I want to give back to Sirdo.
Yeah, thank you. So, Erlend, I think we can switch back. Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, as Gash mentioned, in this area, which the 82nd and 95th have been attacking, the Russian units were quite a bit weaker. We have had some proof of Ukrainian advances, approximately some 5 to maybe 7 kilometers deep in the gray zone, essentially. However, these 2 units, the air assault brigades, have been very, very silent and very tight on OPSEC since the late January, since like for almost a month, which is quite impressive. And we don't really have many geolocations or real proof of advances. So the Ukrainian success in this area needs to be clarified, but it's most likely the more promising sort of branch of this counterattack compared to the Western one, so to speak. And by the way, I keep calling it counterattack because there's been endless discussion online whether it's a counteroffensive or a counterattack, and it's not something that I'm really aiming to go into tonight. It's kind of just for other people to discuss, I suppose. So given this little introduction, I'm going to basically provide some historical perspective on what happened in this area of the front since late 2024, basically in the last year and a half, because it's quite interesting and it's been one of the areas where Russia has advanced the deepest in the entire front line. So this brings me back basically to the fall of Vuhledar, which was in early October of 2024. And what basically transpired after this, obviously Vuhledar was a very important defensive strong point in southern Donetsk, and it lasted 2 years and a half. After it fell, however, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which had been basically the main headquarters unit in this entire sector and basically providing a very strong structure to all the other units that were attached to it, was rotated out to Kherson for recovery, and I think it spent some 4 to 5 times in recovery, which is a relatively long time for Ukrainian units. And at the same time, as you can see on the map, about 30 kilometers west near Velika Novosilka, the 58th Motorized Brigade, which was also in the same sort of role of headquarters for attached units, was rotated out to Kharkiv border, and it's still there, which is also kind of noteworthy in my opinion. And these two troops rotations have basically been the end of frontline stability in this area of the sector, which had been basically in these exact positions since 2022. So it lasted 2.5 years of very stable sort of defense. And once these two units rotated out, it basically kind of very slowly broke apart. So we can move to November 2024, about 1 month later. And in this few weeks, the Russians managed to drive quite a deep wedge between Vuhledar and Velika Novosilka, mainly the 36th Motor Rifle Brigade, which I think managed to advance like 10 kilometers in one day at one point, which was impressive at the time and is still impressive at this point in the war. And at the same time, the 5th Tank Brigade and 40th Naval Infantry were also advancing on its left flank. And this essentially led to the fall of Velika Novosilka's eastern flank. Now, the Ukrainians redeployed the 23rd Mechanized Brigade between Velika Novosilka and Maximivka, approximately, to kind of try and slow this down. But even it, along with battalion tactical groups from the 169th Training Center, the 48th Assault Battalion, and a combined grouping between the 20th Special Purpose Battalion and the 3rd Mechanized Battalion of the Presidential Brigade, which, by the way, had been here for quite a long time and was very experienced and was very effective in terms of drone strikes. But this entire sort of defensive structure, which was very task organized, was not enough to stop the Russian push, basically. So this led to a situation in late 2024 where the 110th Mechanized Brigade had to be redeployed from Pokrovsk directly to Velika Novosilka to try and basically hold this town. But at this point, the Russians had cut off Velika Novosilka from both the north and the south. And as you can see in the map, the Mokryali River is a very important natural obstacle in this area because the entire town of Velika Novosilka, right there in the middle, is essentially surrounded by water once you take the eastern outskirts. So in late December 2024, in midwinter, it was a very cold winter. I mean, not as cold as this year, but from the stories told by the soldiers of the 110th, it was a very, very rough sort of defensive positions. And at this point, the 110th basically had to resupply its troops over the river in basically a sort of bridgehead, which was very, very hard to accomplish and essentially impossible. So this led to, by the end of the year or early 2025, the fall of Velika Novosilka, again, another very important defensive strong point in southern Donetsk. And this all sort of cascaded in the next few months. So I'm going to skip ahead to March 2025 as the Russian advances, as you can see on the map, they weren't very extensive after the fall of Velika Novosilka, like in the first couple of months. And at this point, we're kind of in a situation where we have a fairly solid line of ground forces brigades north of Velika Novosilka, the 23rd, 141st, and 31st Mechanized Brigades. Then there's the 17th National Guard Brigade, which had been there for a very long time on the western flank of the city and was very experienced. the front had not been super active before 2024, so they were still decently staffed. And this section of the front would be later in the early summer assigned to the 20th Army Corps. At the same time, however, and this is kind of the main point of this entire segment, there was this wide, very, very wide sector around Huliaipole and Poltavka, west of Velika Novosylka, that was entirely held by territorial defense brigades. 3 territorial defense brigades here since, if I remember correctly, 2023 at least, if not 2022. And these units were not like especially undermanned at this point, or at least not in 2024. But what they really lack is rear support. So artillery, communications, electronic warfare, all the sort of enablers that would allow you to set up a proper defensive line, and especially engineering equipment, which is obviously very important when it comes to defense. And this entire sector was very, very light on forces on both sides until basically late 2024. So the very sort of fragmented Ukrainian defensive structure was mirrored by a relatively low force density on the Russian side. So it was not like a major issue, but it would become one in 2025. And this kind of began really showing in late summer of 2025, when the Russian forces on the north had reached the Vovcha, had gradually pushed the Ukrainian forces back, the mechanized brigades that I mentioned earlier, to the Vovcha River, which was a fairly defensible sort of area, sort of line. But at the same time, the Vostok grouping, which is the main Russian headquarters in this area, basically the level above the Combined Arms Army, shifted kind of its attention to the western flank towards Berezove, as you can see here, and Temirivka, and basically started pushing the 110th TDF Brigade out of its positions with not much opposition, to be completely honest. And at this point, in late August, the 110th Mechanized Brigade once again was committed to the sort of the defensive purpose in this area, to kind of try and replace the 110th TF, which is kind of similar to their role they had in Velika Novosylka. And in this case, they were coming from recovery from the rear. So on paper, they should have been in kind of a better condition. At the same time, they had lost their command team in a strike in the rear in Dnipro Oblast, if I remember correctly, on the 1st of July of 2025. So they were not exactly at the top of their form, so to speak. At the same time, the northern flank of the 110th was kind of reinforced by a very, very odd battalion tactical group from the 154th Brigade, which you can see here with the big blue arrow near Berezove. And this battalion tactical group was composed, like we have missing in action data for soldiers from even the material support battalion. So basically logistics soldiers, tankers, and infantrymen. It was a very, very odd battalion tactical group, likely just composed in this way due to manpower shortages, basically, in the brigade, which had been fighting in Kharkiv previously. And this was committed here in a very odd way as well. It was attached, like basically its infantry was spread out and attached to, for example, the 6th Battalion of the 108th TDF Brigade, which was itself attached to the 110th TDF Brigade. So basically an attachment to an attachment. And this is, in my opinion, this was the sort of most demonstrative example of what had gone wrong with the Ukrainian defense in this area. Basically, just this sort of endless attachment doctrine where random units were put together, like even at the squad or platoon level, and just asked to hold a certain part of the front. And as long as Russian pressure was low enough, this was not an issue. But at the moment that basically 2 Combined Arms Army, even though they're kind of small, the 36th and the 5th, but basically these 3 brigades, 4 brigades, 1 full division were committed to attacking against them. There was not much defense possible, basically. And so this is basically what happened in September, or in the early autumn. Then it just gets worse, because the same thing basically happened to the 102nd TDF Brigade in October and November. So while the Russians had managed to advance up to Verbove on the north, that you can see on the map, they shifted focus south directly towards Huliaipole, essentially. And the two main sort of defensive strong points in this area were Poltavka and Malinivka, which you can see in the center of the map. And while they were fortified towns, they were also a crossing point over the Yanchur River, I believe it is, which basically had secured, once captured, had secured a bridgehead for the Russians. And even here, the Ukrainian defensive structure was very fragmented. As you can see, we have 2 battalions from the 125th Brigade, which was originally territorial defense, then transformed into mechanized in summer 2025. But obviously, the battalions that were in this area had not been sort of reformatted yet, so they were still light infantry. And you also had a battalion tactical group from the 142nd Mechanized Brigade, which was supposed to help the 102nd establish a reserve in this area in case the Russians broke through. And there were also other territorial battalions like the 5th from the 140th Brigade near Uspenivka and the 1st from the 118th. And these were under the 110th Mechanized. So at this point, the Russians just basically kept pushing through Uspenivka and Poltavka. The battalion tactical group from the 142nd was committed. It was also, it took pretty heavy casualties, as well as the 2 battalions from the 125th. And Huliaipole's eastern flank had basically collapsed by the end of November. Now, to be clear, our methodology doesn't exactly allow us to gauge manpower or casualties to have like absolute numbers. So I'm not going to claim that these battalions were destroyed in the military sense of the word, but I think it's quite safe to say that they were essentially made combat incapable by late November. And this is why in December, the sort of big decision of the Ukrainian General Staff was to redeploy the 225th Assault Regiment from Sumy direction. And at this point, the media in Ukraine was talking about this direction a lot because it was a very, very critical moment. It was potentially, it had potentially catastrophic implications, as just west of this area, there's the basically southern defense line of Zaporizhia Oblast, and it runs west to east. So the Russians were pushing east to west, and they were threatening to basically just drive behind this defensive line, which had been built since 2023. So it was quite an extensive project, and it could have been made nearly useless by this sort of this Russian pressure on its eastern flank. So the 225th gets redeployed, basically in its entire strength. The Shkval battalion of it, which is usually known as Morok, is deployed south of Huliaipole. It still is now, like between Dorozhnyanka and Zaliznichne, which is just west of Huliaipole. And the sector runs pretty much straight to Dobropilya. The road in yellow that you can see on the map is the Pokrovsky-Huliaipole highway, which obviously used to be a pretty important logistical artery before Huliaipole fell and the front line got so close. And now it basically became the holding point of the 225th, which during December established the front line along this highway. As you can see, all of its battalions were deployed here. Also the artillery and UIS battalions, pretty much the entire regiment was redeployed here, which is not something we usually see with assault regiments, as very often they're deployed in battalion groups or company groups. They're very spread out. I think this kind of highlights how critical the area was. So the 225th kind of took charge of the area and took a lot of the territorial units that were in this sector under its command. There were a couple of incidents that were reported quite widely in Ukraine. In the first one, a battalion command post of the 102nd TDF Brigade was basically captured intact by the Russians in Huliaipole itself. From what the stories that have come out seems to state, essentially the Russians infiltrated into the city. The order from higher headquarters to the battalion staff to leave was given too late, and the battalion staff did escape. I believe they may have had 1 killed in action or 1 wounded that would later unfortunately die. So the most of the battalion staff did escape, but they didn't have time to burn or destroy the command post, so it was captured intact by the Russians, along with a bunch of hard drives and various just sort of OPSEC-related documents. Another incident was apparently a friendly fire event between Poltavka and Hulyai-Pole, where between the 102nd and other units, because higher headquarters didn't coordinate the sort of retreat of two companies properly, and there was some friendly fire. I don't think there were any casualties from it, but it did happen. And the other kind of like major news item that came out in Ukraine that was sort of semi-debunked was that soldiers of the 225th Regiment were sent to the rear areas of the 102nd TDF Brigade to basically bring soldiers of the 102nd into training areas where they could train together and in a certain way rebuild combat capability of the 102nd Brigade. However, apparently the IRHQs did not properly coordinate this either, so the soldiers of the 102nd did not know that they would be brought to those training areas, and they thought that the soldiers of the 225th had basically gone there to arrest them and put them on assaults or something similar. So there was some commotion in that event as well, but it kind of just resolved itself as later on we saw elements of the 102nd collaborate with the 142nd Mechanized Brigade under the 225th Assault Regiment. So this kind of gives us an idea that they most likely did manage to get that training from the 225th and rebuild at least some sort of combat capability within the brigade, which, like I said about the battalions earlier, it wasn't destroyed, but I think saying it was made combating capable is a fair description of events. So this is kind of what happened in the Hulyai-Pole Dobropilia sector. Up north, near Ternovate, the 1st Assault Regiment was redeployed nearly in its entirety from Dobropilia, which was kind of surprising because the Russians weren't advancing as quickly in that area. And it also had attached some elements of other assault regiments that I mentioned at the beginning. So the 24th IDAR, the 33rd, and the 210th. And something that I think maybe with hindsight can be said, but it wasn't really clear at the time, is that the fact that Ukrainian command decided to redeploy so many assault regiments to this area could have been kind of used by the Russians as a hint that maybe the aim was some sort of counterattack, localized counterattack. But again, it's hindsight and just some considerations after the facts. So yeah, I think this kind of gives a good overview of the latest events in this area and just some historical context for those who maybe aren't following as closely the single specific sections of the front.
Well, that was a very comprehensive and informative report, Sirdo. Thank you so much. Back to the kind of controversy about that you mentioned first about if this is a counter-offensive, counterattack, or if it's just clearing operations, as the Ukrainian officials are saying. How many brigades do you see that are involved in these attacks that have been redeployed and rotated, that are involved in these attacks on the Ukrainian side? Because I think that's relevant to the question.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to brigades, it should be just two, the 82nd and 95th. The 92nd Assault, as you can see in this map, which is from December, it was already here in late 2025, and it may have taken part in some fighting around Verbove, so on the northern side of this of the map, basically. Although it's kind of like yet to be confirmed. I think the real focus is the assault regiments. So two were entirely deployed here, not exactly for the offensive, but rather to stabilize the front. Then the 33rd also seemingly entirely came in sometime in January, I think, or maybe late December. I think if we want to go in terms of newly deployed battalions, it's probably somewhere along the lines of 10 to 12, maybe 15 at most. So I'm taking 3 or 4 from the 2 air assault brigades, plus probably a couple, I think, from the 475th Assault Regiment. and some more from the other assault regiments. So I would say, yeah, probably between 10 to 15 battalions is my guess. Then, of course, it's always kind of hard to gauge this because the assault regiments specifically operate in these sort of assault groups that can go from like platoon to company plus size. So, for example, we saw I think the 475th posted a video of their assault south of Ternuvate from I can't remember the name of the town actually, but yeah, just south of Ternuvate, and I believe it was 5 APCs, so a reinforced platoon worth of forces. But of course, there's the whole like battalion assets deployed behind it. So if we want to go purely on battalions, it's probably 10 to 15. I don't think I can really gauge an amount of manpower like an absolute number that's involved.
And then my second question is, did you see any patterns where some of these units went quite dark in a synchronized manner just before the start of February or in the early days of February?
Okay, I would say definitely when it comes to the air assault brigades, in the sense that they're still kind of dark. Like they've posted very, very little footage from the entire, like the part south of Pokrovsk. We really have very, very little footage. Generally, we do have some MIA reports, so soldiers missing in actions and posts being published by the families on Facebook. So I think the units are still reporting when a soldier goes missing and kind of like informing the family, etc. But in terms of like the more public and official page posts, it's very clear that there's I think a deliberate effort to maintain OPSEC. The assault regiments, for the most part, were already here. As I mentioned, the 475th was the only one that was redeployed. And I think they posted some FP2 strikes on Uspenivka, like in the first week of February, or maybe around the 10th of February. So, like just after redeploying. So I wouldn't say that they were really under OPSEC. One thing I will mention is that the two air assault brigades, they had been operating in Pokrovsk at least until mid-January. So like I think around the 14th or 15th of January is when we have the last data points in Pokrovsk for these units. It's been a really fast redeployment. So there's not been like a moment of silence where you can tell they're redeploying. It's been more like silence because they're doing something that's covered by OPSEC. I'll put it this way.
But again, did you see that it was synchronized? Just a little bit more pointed.
I will say yes, but probably more because they're like the redeployment times were very similar. So the data points from Pokrovsk stopped for both at around the same time because they both moved out at around the same time. That's what I would say. While in terms of footage posted from the new area in like late January, early February, there's been almost none from both. So yeah, I would say it's synchronized, but just because there's very little.
Yeah. I will leave up, to the viewers, listeners, to make up their own minds about what this means. But thank you so much, Sirdo. We have a question for Andrew, and I'm not sure if maybe Gesh needs to pull up his map again. So maybe you can prepare that, Gesh. Andrew is saying, are there another group of forces to keep the eyes on for going to Siversk? So that's a little bit of a different area of the battlefield, but we're going to take Andrew's question now, and then please feel free to ask Gesh and Sirdo questions before we go to the rest of the Q&A.
I think that rather fits with Sirdo.
Yeah, but we maybe need your map. That's the thing.
Oh, need to find that again. Wait, give me a second. I mean, I only have the Russian units displayed here, so I don't know how much sense this makes. Sirdo, can you
Yeah, on the Ukrainian side, I wouldn't really say there's like a specific group of forces available. At least not that I know.
Yeah.
I think like it's kind of interesting, maybe not for Seversk, but there's quite a few relatively experienced brigades that are holding the northern border in between Kharkiv and Sumy, namely like the 22nd Mechanized and 58th Motorized. They're basically west of Hliboke, if you want to show it on the map. Part of the 14th Army Corps, which is holding the border there. But yeah, they've been deployed on the border for, I think, 1 year and a half at this point, and it's kind of interesting because they're like full-on ground forces brigades.
Yeah, and regarding Seversk, I think it's also important to mention that the command shuffle might have also made the situation a bit worse. I mean, after the fall of Seversk, the command of the 30th and of the 10th Brigade was dismissed because they didn't. There was some reports of them not properly reporting the positions and the lost positions. So I don't know how much the advance after Seversk have also have been influenced by this.
Yeah, I think it was the 54th and 10th, by the way.
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
54th. My bad.
They also established like a tactical group north of Seversk. North of Chasiv Yar, west of Seversk, to kind of like coordinate reestablishing a proper defensive line. I don't think there's been severe advances west of Seversk, but what's been kind of more interesting has been the like Orikhovo-Vasilievka area, that one that you're on, Erlend, which has been very silent, I think, since like late 2023 after the fight for Bakhmut, and the 30th Mechanized has been there for like 30th Mechanized and 56th Motorized just a bit to the south. They might be very stretched, so some Russian pressure could be enough to kind of advance by a few towns. Like if we want to go by frequent patterns, usually the Russians find a spot where Ukrainian units are more heavily attrited, push there a bit, advance like a few kilometers, then Ukrainians reinforce with, I don't know, assault regiments as an example, and they kind of stop the Russian momentum there. Then there's a bit of a pause, and then they find another spot to attack in. So that sort of like southern highway going to Slovyansk and Kramatorsk might be the new kind of center of gravity for the Russians.
Yeah, this area is has recently come under quite some more pressure. The highway is actually in some areas between actually both between Slovyansk and Izium, and also between Kramatorsk and Slovyansk has come under drone fire reportedly, and they've been putting up quite a lot of netting around the roads in these areas, because the back roads are really not in a good shape, and that counts for most of the area west of both Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, and also west of Izium. The roads are basically not capable of providing enough logistical support to the front. If they would lose access to these roads, or they would be too dangerous to use, it would be a very big problem, and that would affect obviously all of this eastern southern part, going from Slovyansk all the way down to, or from Liman rather, all the way down to Konstantinivka. But yeah, back to the southern part. Do you have any specific news about units in the area towards Zaporizhzhia, the city of Zaporizhzhia?
Unfortunately, not really, or at least not like anything super recent. I know there's like a company tactical group of the 253rd Assault Regiment that's cleared, I think, Pavlivka and Lukyanivske, if I remember correctly. This area, from a unit perspective, is kind of a mess because there's a lot of HUR units, and it's hard to figure out like their structure, who is dependent on who is attached, etc. They're very kind of like small units and small elements just operating around this area, clearing out certain settlements or like small hamlets and that sort of stuff. We do know from like there's been Russian rumors of some Ukrainian pushes north to south in this area, like I think potentially as deep as Stepove, but I don't have like very specific units that may have taken part in them.
Okay, thank you. Andrew says we need to update the map because the situation is much more. It's been changing. Let's see if there's any change between. There's nothing for the 22nd, so I don't understand which map is the most recent one, Andrew. I'm sorry. Gesh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was.
You gonna say something, Gesh?
No. I was like, I mean, I had some thoughts. I mean, I can quickly share my screen, but I have to add out soon. So let's make it quick. I mean, I wanted to report something about the northern border more, because there was some, in my opinion, interesting developments as well. We now have the full confirmation that, for example, the Russians redeployed the 71st Division to the area east of Vovchansk. So it's also interesting if they can deploy them, like how they deploy them, and if they're like what their combat capability is. We also had footage of one of the brigades from Kupiansk shelling here near Prilipka, but let's say it like that. Before this is confirmed by additional information, I would be very cautious to attribute another transfer there. And what I do know is that the Russians have also transferred at least one battalion to this area to try to push from this direction. I mean, one of the main goals of the Russians is, I don't know if I can find the. No, I'm really bad with. Is eventually, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is eventually reaching Veliki Buluk, and I think, I mean, they reduced the efforts in the Milova area. At this point, it's basically like one regiment between Milova and Odratnet, and maybe additional one battalion tactical group, but and then one more regiment between Varychanske and Krasnopershe. All the additional regiments that they used at the beginning of the push here to achieve the current positions were transferred to the area west of Vovchansk. So they put more focus around Staritsia, Prilipka, and to develop here. I mean, they have pushed here in the last months. I think if you compare to like the 1st of January, you can see it that they managed. I mean, it's not a big breakthrough, but it's an advance in an area where the Russians have had historically very little movement. Like there was like in the last, if you look at it, like I mean it's a very, very slow and grinding advance, and I know that for some units the Russians have lost a lot of men in Vovchansk and around Vovchansk. So it's a very, very costly endeavor, and it saddens me a bit that they are now advancing actually.
Yeah, just to add on if you move a little bit northeast to the area you were showing earlier, where that sort of point. On the Ukrainian side, here is I think the Heart Brigade of the Border Guards is the main unit. They've been striking like a few kilometers deep in Belgorod, and they've also had a few infantry engagements in these little towns on the border. So definitely something to keep an eye on, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so far there is not a big Russian force here. It's like, as I said, just one battalion. There are 1,857th. It's part of the 69th division, if anyone wants to know. I think it's not that well known of a battalion, but yes, they're trying to get a bit of, like, to put some pressure on the Ukrainians. You know, the Russian strategy is also often to put as many pressure points at the Ukrainians to find out where they can break them, because I think the Russians have more. They have more men to expand, and they are expanding more men. And yeah, if they do it at as wide area as possible, they may find a point where they can get, like, where they can grab a village. How they did it in where was it, around Harab? What was the village called? Sorry, now I don't find it. It was around here, yeah, Harabovska, where they had a border raid, and there's some additional border raids up here. Where another battalion is trying to advance into Ukrainian territory around Komarivka. That's like the 33rd battalion, and they're always like picking a bit and trying to bind the Ukrainian forces. Yes, but I sadly have to head out now. So I wish you all others a very nice stream, and see you soon. Sorry for the quick exit.
Thank you so much, I guess. Do we see any more questions about the this segment? I don't know. No, I don't think so. I think we can say thank you so much to Unit Observer, Sirdo, and Gash. Please keep up the good work. This has been a breath of fresh air in the chaos of X and Twitter, or former Twitter maps with enormous amounts of arrows with no real, foundation in analysis or sources. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, always glad to contribute. So thank you guys for having us.
And if you have to head out, or you can stay for the rest of the stream.
No, I can stay. I'm okay.
Cool. I'll give the word back to you, Joseph.
Okay, thank you, Erlend. I only see a couple questions. Chat's been pretty lively, but not a lot of questions for us. So one was to Stanimir. I guess that's another question from Andrew, but it's just about Lada selling in Yemen. And I don't know, I thought it was just kind of an interesting rabbit hole. So Stanimir, take us down the Lada rabbit hole for a moment.
So officially, Ladas sell around 20,000 units abroad. But when we're talking abroad, this includes the countries from the Eurasian Economic Zone, countries that are not part of that, but are part of the CIS, so former Soviet countries that are not part of that, but are part of CIS. And also we have Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and according to them, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Bosnia, and Germany. Also, not on the map are Vietnam. Yeah, they say Yemen, one of the countries that they sell to. But I think those come from Iran because that's where they have more sales. But yes, because they sell 20,000 cars a year for all of these countries, combined, you might have just a few cars, a few Ladas being sold in Yemen, a few dozens, as Andrew says. But it's not that big of a market for Lada. For Lada, the domestic market is the biggest thing. Less than 10% of their sales come from sales abroad, and they're pretty much stable at that level. They haven't changed that much in 2024 and 2025.
Everything makes sense to me except Germany, and I just have to assume it's either some kind of money laundering operation or just maybe there's a community of maybe Lada appreciators or something somewhere I'm not aware of.
Don't you want to buy a shittier Dacia for more money?
I don't know, man. But
yeah, that's what a Lada literally is. That's what a Lada is. At least the newest model is basically a shittier Dacia for more money. the base model is probably cheaper than a Dacia and is a Dacia underneath, at least the previous series of Dacia for the chassis. They were going to update the chassis of Ladas to the newest Dacia chassis, but they couldn't do it because that was set for 2022 and something happened in 2022. I don't know if you know. And Renault left Russia, so they're stuck with the Dacia that's 10 years old.
Yeah, that's the one. Like, if you're in Tajikistan, for example, Lada's pretty nice, but in Germany, you got so many better options. So it just puzzled me. Mr. Germany, I'm in your wheelhouse here, so I feel I should probably ask if you have anything to say about it.
Yeah, I just wonder where this comes from, where this is actually possible. I mean, I live in Eastern Germany, right? And I see, especially during like good summer times, I see like every few days maybe a Trabi driving around, like a Trabant. But Ladas, I mean, I'm not that old. I might be missing a detail here, but I'm not sure why one could buy Ladas, to be honest.
Supposedly they used to have, so there's a question if they're selling to dealerships. No, supposedly they have official dealerships of Lada abroad. So maybe you haven't seen it, but maybe they have a small Lada dealership somewhere in Germany.
You know what? I'm gonna Google now.
Yeah, but we're talking about new Ladas, not the old ones you're thinking of, maybe.
Yeah, that's. I mean that I would get that somebody is like buying like an old one from some dealership or like privately, like they do with the Trabis. I mean, they're very popular here in Eastern Germany, especially in summer when they're driving around. You see like 40, 50, 60-year-old cars in perfect conditions. And when my grandpa, for example, sees them, it's always like, oh yeah, man, so many good old memories. The paper cars are back, and but Lada's new ones, I have no clue. I've got to Google this.
Because I lived in Plovdiv back when I was in high school, we had an official Lada dealership just on the road to school for me, and they always had the Lada Nivas in front and the older models of newer Ladas after the 90s. So that's where I used to see them. That's why I'm saying it's usually their own dealership.
Well, I noticed the Bulgarians have resisted the temptations of the 2025 Lada line, Stanimir.
Yes, but I think even the Russians have resisted the temptation of the 2025 Lada line.
Okay, well, that was a fun little diversion there. A lot of exports. They do exist, not at scale, but they do exist. And then, next question. Do we need to reassess the capability of the Flamingo upwards after the recent strikes? So real quick, I'll give my hot take and I'll give other people an opportunity. My general understanding, I'm not a missile expert. We talk to John Ridge once in a while. Good little missile expert on Twitter. If you guys want to check him out. But I think his assessment when we saw it first used was like basically okay. They launched a few of them, a couple of them missed, but one of them hit, something like that. I don't know if the recent strike we can really assess it upwards because there's a lot of variables. How many missiles did they strike with? What type of mission was it? Blah, 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 blah. But I think it's still an okay missile. I mean, again, just the fact that the Ukrainians have a missile that's somewhat affordable that they can use in wartime. There was a time when people were saying like, there's no way that Ukraine could build their own missile in time to do anything. But there's still are open questions of like, you definitely want to put your resources towards the best, weapon systems you can. So I think obviously Ukraine still needs like strike capabilities like Taurus and other missiles that the West has access to, and this should be given to Ukraine for obvious reasons. But does anyone else want to weigh in on this Flamingo thing?
Yeah, I just want to say that let's say that this recent hit was a Flamingo, because that's still not 100% confirmed. It's a significant hit in the sense that it has destroyed some stuff inside a important military production facility that produces, I believe, boosters for Iskander missiles, but we don't know exactly what they hit inside this factory. So we don't know the damage except for the hole in the roof, which seems to be quite substantial. This was one hit, and if we were to believe that the video posted by one of the directors of Firepoint had anything to do with that strike, there were several missiles launched and only one got to the target. Whether it being that the other missiles were shot down, I don't think we've seen any evidence of that, or if they just failed en route. It doesn't really matter which of those it is, in my opinion. But one hit is that we can document definitely was a hit if it's confirmed that it was a Flamingo missile, which still is not 100% confirmed, but I believe it is because the range is substantial. In this case, it's around 1,500 kilometers. That's not a good statistics. So I would be very cautious about sharing for the Flamingo now being a success. That's my assessment. Maybe Colby can chime in as well.
Yeah, I would say that we do not have enough evidence to make any new definitive reassessments about the success of the Flamingo program. So far, I would say that Firepoint's claims have not been validated largely in terms of their claimed production capacity, the fact that they say that they've found thousands of old engines that they've been able to repurpose in support of this supposed robust production capacity. So overall, I'm myself, and I know John, and I suspect Fabian as well, although I have not spoken to him about this recently, and he hasn't written about it recently either. But I suspect that all three of us would largely be on the same page about being so skeptical still about the program. But it is a good thing that whatever it was, presumably, I'll operate under the assumption that it was in fact Flamingo that was responsible, at least in part, for this operation. It is a good thing that Ukraine has actually been able to deal some damage at this level of range. But in the grand scheme of things, this is not a massive success given the size of this facility, and there's some modest damage to one building in this large facility. So Ukraine is going to need a whole lot more to be able to actually start creating some strategic implications on Russia's war effort here. So I would not say that there needs to be a reassessment of the success of Flamingo.
Yep. I just pulled up the facility. As you can see, it's absolutely massive. To destroy this facility, you would need dozens, maybe
hundreds,
yeah.
if not even like thousands, because the Russians are going to intercept some number of the missiles, some are going to miss. So this is not a small task here, looking at this facility, when you consider that you need to hit each building numerous times, many times, not just like once or twice or even like a dozen times. Like, these buildings are huge. So to actually cause significant damage, and people will make the argument like, well, you don't need to completely destroy it. You just, if you do some amount of damage, that can have interruptions to production, which is true. You don't need to don't need to completely destroy the target to cause production impacts. But Ukraine needs to achieve more than just some temporary disruptions in Russian missile production for there to be a change in sort of the balance of power here. So it remains a very tall order.
Yeah. What I take out of this is I'm happy that Ukraine got in a hit. I hope they get more in, but not really any change of of my view of the FP5 Flamingo.
Yeah, like I think it's fair to say that, like, if you look at the task at hand, it's obviously, you know, a tall order and it's difficult. And I'm not sure the Flamingo is up to that task, but you know, if you are looking at it more optimistically, it's like, well, they are able to hit stuff with a missile, which was, you know, unheard, not thought possible by some people before. So I don't know. It's like, it's a subjective thing, I think, to a certain degree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before. John has said this. I think Fabian's probably said this as well. That there's definite value in stretching Russian air defenses further, because there's targets at risk now that were not previously at risk. There's psychological value in sort of shattering a perception of safety. So that shouldn't be discounted. And so the Ukrainians need to be looking at more of these things, that maybe even if the military return on investment in terms of striking strategic infrastructure, but there's definite value to counter value attacks, because Ukraine is being subjected to counter value attacks, and I don't think that Russia should be safe from that either. So counter value attacks, I think that the biggest ROI is actually striking oil and gas infrastructure still, because those are just softer targets, easier to cause a lot more disruption to them due to their inherent nature, than going after production facilities. Although, you know, all of the above is good, but with limited resources still, and with a lot of Ukraine's missile programs still being quite in their infancy, there's probably better ROI after going after the oil and gas energy infrastructure.
And yeah, I just wanted to clarify real quick, because Erlend was talking a little bit before about like, we don't know if it was a Flamingo. We just want to say, like, the government of Ukraine said in a recent assessment that it was a Flamingo. We're not denying that or like arguing with that. It's more just that there are certain ways to sort of prove that by looking at satellite photos and videos and things like that. And it hasn't been independently verified by anyone. So you know, we just try to be careful about that stuff when we say it was a Flamingo. You know, I think in general, when Erlend would make a claim like that, he would want to know that independently versus just what the government said. But we're not saying like the government of Ukraine is lying or something. It's more just, it can't be independently verified as of now. Is that accurate, Erlend?
Yeah, like everything points towards this being a Flamingo strike, but we don't have any footage of the missile in flight. And that's pretty much what I would want to see. So yeah, but I mean, the blast is significant. Ukraine doesn't really have any other system except for the kind of Cessna planes that they loaded up with explosives that have that kind of range and that kind of payload capacity. So yeah, I guess it was a Flamingo, but that's pretty much where it stops for me.
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's a kind of a minor distinction, but it's an important one, and we try to be careful and independently verify things. That's kind of, you know, what we're all about. So just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, I think Colby already pointed out the scale of this problem, right? These factories are huge. That's just how this works. It's going to be a difficult task to disable Russian war industry at that level and at that scale. So cool. Any other questions we want to address, Erlend?
I didn't see any more.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks, chat, for your questions. I thought it was a good exchange this week. We're always happy to take your questions, so feel free to participate in chat. Thanks for your participation this week. Thank you to our panel. Thanks to Mr. German Aid, to Sirdo, and to Gesh, our guests. Thanks as always to Colby, Stanimir, Erlend, and I guess myself. Yeah, we appreciate everyone. We know not everyone can watch the show live, but we appreciate you guys watching after the fact and liking and subscribing and spreading the word and all that. Please do check out Tochnyi.info. That's our website. I'm sure there's lots of stuff from Unit Observer Project up there. So if you're interested in kind of what Sirdo and Gesh are up to, I think it's a great place to check out. And yeah, we publish lots of articles and other research and stuff. So yeah, I think that's about it from us this week. We'll see everyone next week, 2100 Kyiv time. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
Heroям slava.
On behalf of the brave.